We all know PragerU. They spend absurd amounts of money on YouTube ads, to the point where if you haven't seen at least the first 3 seconds of one, you must be using an ad blocker like some kind of fucking criminal who hates megacorporations like YouTube. But for those of you who are blissfully unaware and have somehow found my channel without seeing Sean's videos about them, PragerU is a fake university funded by fracking billionaires and various other right-wing pressure groups that serves as a far-right propaganda tool run by Dennis Prager, a man so bigoted that he's basically a cartoon version of a conservative at this point. You might think I'm being hyperbolic here, but I'm actually being serious. Seriously, look him up, it's actually impressive how bad he is. Like, just some of the shit he did, as an overview. He once said about gay marriage, the acceptance of homosexuality as the equal of heterosexual marital love signifies the decline of Western civilization, and also, there is no plausible argument for denying polygamous relationships or brothers or sisters, or parents and adult children, the right to marry. In 2014, he also said that the heterosexual AIDS crisis was something entirely manufactured by the left. He also campaigned to get Bob Dole elected, focusing on getting him the Jewish vote since Dole was very pro-Israel, making the classic mistake of thinking that every Jew is necessarily a supporter of Israel, and when this didn't work, simply stated that he believed that Jews are ignorant. Oh, and he had a huge problem with Muslim politicians swearing in on the Quran, saying insofar as a member of Congress taking an oath to serve America and uphold its values is concerned, America is interested in only one book, the Bible. If you're incapable of taking an oath on that book, don't serve in Congress. Because of course he fucking did. Like I said, he's a cartoon villain version of a conservative talk radio host. So why are we talking about PragerU today when so many other bread tubers have taken shots at them recently? Well, you see, I have a theory that left-wingers are best in bed because we believe in true equality and making sure that all parties involved are happy and satisfied, that each participant receives enough pleasure to satisfy them, thus encouraging them to spread this pleasure to their comrades, whereas the Randian right-winger believes only in satisfying oneself, in being the paragon of individualism, and, I don't know, maybe centrist poke your clit a couple of times and call it quits. This of course is a joke, but in my experience it's actually rung true to an extent. I have yet to meet a right-winger who genuinely enjoyed, or even enthusiastically participates in, cunnilingus, though of course this is just through discussions with acquaintances. So I thought that it might be fun to discuss just how little conservative outlets like this understands sex, and PragerU, being extremely conservative and therefore extremely sex negative, straddles the line between constantly horny on men and actively hating women and their ability to enjoy both sex and personal and bodily autonomy, and I thought it might be worth taking a look at how one of the right's most prominent propaganda organisations covers sex and gender roles. I won't go into their views on gender and trans people as a whole unless it comes up in the videos I'm covering today, or we'd be here all day. Look at a few videos I found on our channel that discuss these issues, and let's see how bad these guys, and it is usually guys, are in bed, shall we? Just before we begin, the videos we're covering in part 1 are as follows. Sex Matters, in which a guest speaker on PragerU parrots a bunch of nonsense about men and women and their attitudes towards sex. Men and the Power of the Visual, wherein Prager insists that men are obsessed with staring at women on a beach like some kind of fucking creep. He Wants You, a follow-up video that had Prager insisting that actually men should be allowed to openly gawp at women, and women just don't understand because of biology or something. Do Not Commit Adultery, which is PragerU's interpretation of the 7th commandment for the modern day. Let's begin, shall we?
I'm going under like eating that Visa key to how we could beat global hunger, achieve total peace on earth. I'm a freak, I'm a local wonder, more lung capacity than Freddie Mercury, vocal numbers.
We start out with a comparison to inanimate objects, always a great intro to a topic.
Have you ever pushed a beach ball underwater? What happens? It pops right back up. Because of its nature, a beach ball will not stay submerged. The same is true for men and women.
People are like beach balls. It's almost as shit as the lock and key analogy that your aunt likes to share on Facebook whenever she sees a woman who's happy with her body and gets pissed off when you respond by using the pencil analogy. Also, just for context, this fella here, Sean McDowell, is apparently an associate professor of theology and philosophy at Biola University. In case you weren't aware, an associate professor is like a professor but actually much lower down on the food chain, so to speak. And Biola U describes itself as a nationally ranked Christian university in the heart of Southern California. Founded in 1908, Biola offers biblically centered education, intentional spiritual development, and vocational preparation within a unique learning community where all faculty, staff, and students are professing Christians. You know, just in case you're wondering if this guy might be some kind of unbiased source of information, it turns out he's the guy you call when the actual professor refuses to take your calls, and he works at a right-wing religious college, teaching a subject that has pretty much nothing to do with the topic at hand. Off to a great start then. We're 14 seconds in, including the intro graphics, and we've already already managed to totally discount the entire video, but let's actually tackle the topics at hand anyway, shall we?
Each has a distinct nature that will always rise to the surface.
What is this distinct nature? How does he explain intersex, non-binary and trans people? In what ways are they different? These are all good questions which go unanswered.
Simply put, men and women are different. They look different.
I mean, not really. Androgyny is obviously a thing.
They have different body parts, different biology, different hormones.
Depending on what you mean by body parts, HRT and surgery can effectively remedy this, and as a result it's more than possible to be biologically male and have breasts, for example, and as mentioned before, intersex people are the exception that totally destroys the idea of the gender binary as always.
They express emotions differently.
This is partly due to hormones, but also socialization. Like, I get that the stereotype is that women cry more when upset and men get more angry, and yeah, sure, part of that can be attributed to testosterone, for example, but there is also a social component. Traditionally, men are expected to bottle up their emotions and vulnerability and expected to be more aggressive and results-driven, whereas traditionally women are expected to be more nurturing and emotional. You can't really ignore that when talking about men and women being different. There are absolutely more emotional men, myself for example, and aggressive women.
They have different needs and desires.
This is bollocks. All people have different needs and desires. Stop trying to make it into a thing.
Now, if you told that to your great-grandmother, who never went to college, never used an iPhone, never used social media, she would have asked, "Why are you telling me something so obvious?" But if you said the same thing to a graduate student in sociology or anthropology, let alone gender studies, they'd say you were wrong.
Now, we know for a moment that this is literally an academic telling us that academics are a load of idiots. On top of the anti-intellectualism, he's trying to say that an elderly woman knows better than a college graduate simply by virtue of being an elderly woman. And I don't know about you, but a lot of all people I know believe a lot of fucking stupid offensive shit, so forgive me if I don't agree with the generation that are, let's be honest here, often impressively racist. Granny can believe men and women are different all she likes, but she also believes that black people are lazy and gays marrying is the same as bestiality, so maybe she's not quite as onto something as it might appear. Also, I love that he's mocking people with humanities degrees when he's literally an associate professor of theology and philosophy.
Men and women are basically the same, the grad student would say. Sexuality exists on a spectrum.
Okay, wait, what the fuck? So we don't believe that sexuality is on a spectrum now? What, do LGBT people just not exist then?
It's determined by people's internal feelings. Between Great Granny and the Gender Studies PhD, I'm going with Granny and her common sense. To believe that men and women are basically the same is to believe a delusion.
Again, no evidence to back this up, not even going to acknowledge the obvious counter-arguments.
A delusion is a belief that contradicts reality. You can say you're Napoleon, but that doesn't make you Napoleon.
Oh god, the right has one joke. At least it didn't use the attack helicopter bit, I suppose, but this is actually worse than Ben Shapiro's "Why aren't you 60" argument.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old, I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably only naive, right?
No, why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60? And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can try to socialize girls into behaving like boys or boys into behaving like girls, but it won't work. You can push the beach ball underwater, but not for long.
What does behaving like a boy or behaving like a girl mean? These things are based on stereotypes and mean fuck all, to be honest. Like, any example someone could give of a male or female behaviour can very easily be refuted in counterexamples given because there is no such thing as an inherently male or female personality trait.
New York pediatrician George Lazarus tells the story of a couple who didn't want their young daughter to conform to the usual pink and blue stereotype. So, they bought her a set of toy trucks. The father went to her room to check on her, and she told him to be quiet. The trucks were sleeping. A similar story about his twin daughters pretending their daddy truck was carrying the baby truck was told by the former president of Harvard University, Lawrence Summers. Give a little boy a truck, or just about any other object, and sooner or later, he will turn it into a weapon. That's reality. Believing delusions makes people say and do foolish, self-destructive things.
Right, he gives 2 examples here, so not exactly a great sample size, but even ignoring that, these examples didn't happen in a vacuum. These kids grew up living in a society where men and boys are valued for and expected to have certain traits, and women and girls have a different set of expectations. Giving a kid a truck doesn't undo layers upon layers of social and psychological conditioning.
Here's an example. If men and women are basically the same, they want the same things from sex, right?
Okay, so finally we get to the point of the video. Sex. Sexy, sexy sex. Bring it on then.
But this isn't true. Women tend to be far more selective about partners with whom they choose to be intimate. That's female nature. Men tend to be, shall we say, far less discerning. That's male nature. Once, this was considered common sense. Nobody had to go to graduate school or do an academic study to figure it out.
So it couldn't have anything to do with the huge amount of stigma that women receive if they're seen to be promiscuous, called sluts, whore, etc., whereas men see sexual conquest as something to boast about then. No, it's just biological fact. Women are just more selective than men when it comes to sexual partners, except for when they aren't, and men are less selective except for when they're not. This is hardly rocket science. We all know friends and acquaintances who buck this trend, many of whom keep it to themselves. This is a correlation, not causation thing. It's a societal pressure that's most likely skewing these results, but PragerU just sees men equals more sex, women equals less sex, and think they've found the indisputable truth.
But now everything is upside down. We're trying to push the beach ball underwater. Today, male and female college students who, 50 years ago, lived in separate buildings and had supervised curfews, now share the same dorm rooms and even the same bathrooms. And sex, well, it's just another form of college entertainment.
I don't see the problem though. Like, now students are treated like adults rather than children, piss in the same toilets, and sometimes, shock horror, have sex for fun. Of course, previously no one had sex just to enjoy it, and I'm sure Associate Professor McDowell would be more than happy to attest that sex for him and his past sexual partners has been a dour, depressing affair.
It means nothing and has no consequences, emotionally, psychologically, or physically.
This is a lie. Almost everyone knows what it's like to be used for sex, to be manipulated into bed, etc. And physically, so STDs and pregnancy just don't exist then, I guess. I guess we finally got rid of AIDS, but it is a shame the human race will be gone in the space of a generation. Although due to climate change that might happen anyway.
But certainly, as far as most women are concerned, this just isn't true. If sex doesn't mean anything, why would any woman feel violated by an uninvited touch? Do you think a man whose leg is touched by a woman he doesn't know feels as violated as a woman does when her leg is touched by a man she doesn't know?
Jesus Christ. Okay, so go in here. Hey, PragerU, Dennis, my friend, have you ever heard of this thing? It's kind of a niche concept, but it's like, have you heard of consent? Fucking Jesus Christ. You enjoy sex, so why do you complain when you get raped? You enjoy cooking, so why'd you get mad when I break into your house and force you to make dinner at gunpoint? And also, yes, men can feel just as violated by uninvited sexual encounters, but it's usually framed as a women's issue because the rate of sexual assaults against women compared to men is astronomical. Fucking rape apologist bullshit. Jesus Christ, fucking hell.
If sex doesn't mean anything, why did Jennifer Lawrence say to The Hollywood Reporter after filming an intimate scene with her co-star Chris Pratt in the movie Passengers, "I knew it was my job, but I couldn't tell my stomach that. That was the most vulnerable I've ever been." She felt vulnerable in that scene, but not in others, because she knows even acting out in a movie scene, sex is a big deal.
Who says sex doesn't mean anything to everyone on the planet? People view sex differently, and just because it makes you feel vulnerable and intimate with someone doesn't mean that it has to be any more than just that. I've had sex with friends before, and it brought us closer together, and really elevated our friendship, but it didn't mean anything romantic. It didn't make us lovers, or cause us to fall for one another. It was just a bit of fun, and it brought us closer together. The two are not mutually exclusive.
That's one of the many reasons it has traditionally been confined to marriage.
Even if we pretend that sex is always a huge deal, why does that mean it has to be confined to marriage? Are people not allowed to have several big deals? I've been in 2 4-year-long relationships, and sex was a big deal to me and my partners, but I've never been married, so what, I wasn't allowed to see it as a big deal without a ring?
And why experience and research shows that sex within marriage is more satisfying emotionally, psychologically, and physically, not to mention spiritually. than sex outside of marriage.
Yeah, because usually people marry the person who's best in bed, and also, yes, within the confines of a relationship, sex can be a very special emotional thing, but that doesn't mean that one-night stands, friends with benefits, or other arrangements also have to be. I've had very intimate dates, meals, drinks with people that I've been in love with, but I've also gone for meals and drinks with my friends. That doesn't mean that we're in love.
Anyone who tells you that men and women are basically the same, and that sex means as little to women as it can to many men, is not telling you the truth.
Okay, so all my female friends who enjoy sex because it's fun, the girlfriends I've had who started out as fuck buddies, and the men I know who are serial monogamists just don't exist then.
They're making stuff up. They're pushing an agenda. Theirs, not yours.
The fucking irony of PragerU whining about anyone else pushing an agenda.
So, trust Granny, trust common sense, and remember the beach ball. I'm Sean McDowell, Associate Professor of Theology and Philosophy at Biola University for Prager University.
Granny is a misinformed bigot who doesn't understand the complexities of concepts like gender. Common sense means nothing and is a worthless argument, and the beach ball is a gross way of comparing people, but let's be honest here, mostly women, to an inanimate object. Well, that was fucking horrible, but oh my friends, it does not stop there, I'm afraid.
You look sexy when you do that. Yeah, you look sexy when you do that. You look sexy when you do that.
Right, a little bit of a lighter one now, and we've got the man himself talking about men and the power of the visual, which, and you'll start to see a trend here, appears to be Dennis Prager desperately trying to convince his wife that it's not his fault that she caught him in a strip club that one time.
Every year, men spend billions of dollars to look at women with little clothing on, such as the annual Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, or with no clothing on, such as on internet sites and in so-called men's magazines.
Who the fuck buys porn to start with, but going even further, who buys it in fucking magazines or swimsuit issues? What bullshit is this? Is it just elderly people who don't know about Pornhub or something?
Women, on the other hand, spend virtually nothing to see unclothed men. Why? Some say that the reason is that men are socialized into viewing women as sex objects, and that women are socialized into not viewing men as sex objects. But if that's true, how do these people explain gay men? They are as aroused by pictures of naked men as heterosexual men are aroused by pictures of naked women. Obviously, then, it's not socialization. It's that men are programmed by nature, not by society, to respond sexually to the visual.
Sounds more like women have worked out how the internet works, to be honest, because most women I know watch a ton of porn. The idea that women do not find naked men arousing is hilarious to me. Has Dennis Prager actually tried asking a wide variety of women outside of his sex-negative conservative echo chamber? It might have more to do with the fact that men are encouraged to be overt about their sexuality, whereas often women being open and honest about theirs is seen as unladylike or intimidating. Men can talk about tits and stuff all they like, but if a woman has the gall to talk about liking big dicks, all the insecure men come out of the woodwork calling her shallow and so on. Likewise, I've seen from personal experience how men feel uncomfortable when a woman starts talking about cunnilingus, because in general, men have a problem with it, and in some cases even see doing it as unmanly.
Hold up, wait, cause I really gotta say one thing straight. I'm not chowing on the choke just so that you'll reciprocate. I just go in, no strings. Tastes great, fun times. I got no one tongue, I'm doing sorcery. If you don't want none, well that's just more for me. Going down on you.
He does not cite any kind of studies to back this up, incidentally, which, considering that this is based on money spent on swimsuit magazines, might be helpful considering that most people just, have the internet.
This is an area in which men are so different from women that it's probably impossible. No, not probably, just outright impossible for a woman to truly understand.
They forgot to draw his other hand on his dick there. Look, I really genuinely hate shaming people for their appearance, but could it be that Dennis Prager's wife just doesn't want to see him naked? Because he must realise that women watch porn as well, that they do get aroused by physical appearances, etc., just as much as men, right? Otherwise what? Is he suggesting that women just don't have any preferences when it comes to physical attraction, and base their opinions on men on personality alone? Because that's obviously not true, just as it isn't in the opposite direction.
Of course women find some men attractive. And of course a woman can have an intense reaction to seeing a very appealing man. But there's still no comparison.
Oh, okay, so he does acknowledge it, but then immediately dismisses it. Fair enough.
The visual alone arouses men. It takes far more to arouse a woman than seeing naked men. If that's all it took, most husbands would walk around the house naked whenever possible. Or at least every time they wanted sex.
Not true, and also attraction is not just a case of, I think that person is hot, I have to fuck them literally right now, as PragerU goes into in the next video, so put a pin in that for now. Also, love the implications of this idea. One, that being naked means sex has to happen is hilarious. I've been with partners who have been naked a majority of the time they've been at home, because they felt more comfortable that way, and I can tell you now, I was not having sex all of the time they were naked. Two, the proliferation of the stereotype that men are all hypersexual and women need to be convinced to engage in any kind of sexual activity, as if sex drives don't exist on a sliding scale depending on hormones, mood, etc. I'm open about the fact that for quite a while I've struggled with sex addiction and a fixation on cunnilingus, but I'm not the norm here. I have been with women who've had lower sex drives, and even some who had higher even than me, which considering mine was the result of a psychological condition was honestly impressive. You do realise that this can work in reverse, right? The women with higher sex drives than their husbands can't just get laid all they want by walking around naked. 3. The idea that all it takes for a man to be immediately horny is to see a sexy lady, which is obviously bollocks. I know it might come as a surprise to some, but sometimes men need seducing as well. 4. The concept of I want sex so I'll just take my clothes off is just ridiculous. Dennis Prager genuinely thinks that couples just have sex by walking up to one another and saying, hello, I am horny, shall we do the sex now? Rather than, a complicated ritual of intimacy and seduction. Does he think that women, when they're horny, just take their clothes off and wait for their partners to take the hint? Has he ever had sex?
And the average heterosexual man is excited countless times a day simply by seeing women. In person, on billboards, in magazines, on television, and even in his imagination. This is not the case for women.
If this was the case, men would have an erection constantly and would require a lot of medical help.
Hi, yes, I'm calling because it's been more than 4 hours, and your ad said to call if it's been more than 4 hours.
Yes, there are some male strip shows for women. But few women ever go, and the few who do, attend them in groups, a girls' night out. And for every one of those shows, there are probably 10,000 female strip shows for males, most of whom attend alone, not as a participant in a guy's night out.
This means nothing, and also he couldn't be asked to look the actual figures up, just hedging his bets with a probably there. By the way, this isn't actually true. Most men I know who have been to strip shows in the UK, it's a little different in some countries where strip club is a euphemism for brothel, have gone as a group because, well, who the fuck spends a lot of money on a strip show on their own? It's a lads' night out thing. You go as a group, pay to get your mates a private dance, etc. I've been to a strip club once when I was 19, found it pretty boring and uncomfortable to be perfectly honest, and ironically enough, ended up making out with one of my straight male friends. And that was for a birthday party. Who are these men going to strip clubs on their own? Is this an American thing?
Let's be honest, there is no magazine featuring men's legs for women to look at and get aroused by. But there are websites and magazines of women's legs for men.
Okay, seriously? Is this a fetish thing? I'm not kink shaming or anything, but I've literally never heard of this, so it has to be so niche it's basically irrelevant. Leg porn? What category does that come under?
And are women paying to view topless men? Men pay good money to look at topless women.
Right, are we talking about strippers again? There are male strippers, but the fact is that women's chests are seen as much more sexualized than men's chests. It is for this reason that women's nipples are banned on social media, but men's aren't.
Again, that doesn't mean women never get turned on by merely looking at some men. Of course they do. But it's only some men, on rare occasion a stranger, and more usually a celebrity. Men get turned on by any sight of female flesh on almost any female.
So is he saying that women only find very conventionally attractive men attractive, but men find everyone attractive? Not sure what his point is here. Dennis Prager is the uncle you really want to keep away from at the beach. Also, this isn't really true at all, unless he lives in a Victorian-era culture of modesty, where even a flash of ankle is going to make him jizz all over himself.
Once, immediately we got to my room, loads of jizz. And first thing this morning, a bit less jizz. And about 20 minutes after that, almost no jizz at all.
The effect of the visual in men is so powerful that it even amazes men. A man came over to me after hearing me lecture on male sexuality and said, "I've got a story to tell you. I was in front of a department store and the window was a seated mannequin. I couldn't believe it, but I found myself looking up her skirt.
That's not a universal thing, to be honest. If it was, we'd all be fucking sex dolls. I certainly don't know any men who want to fuck a mannequin other than the kid from Umbrella Academy. It sounds like a fetish thing, again, not common enough to be able to extrapolate into being some kind of weird rule.
Your love for me is not debatable. Your sexual appetite's insatiable. You never ever make me waitable. Delectable, inflatable you.
Here was a perfectly normal, responsible man who found himself looking up a skirt on an inanimate object shaped like a woman. That's how instinctive it is for men to look at female flesh.
You realise that a lot of ordinary looking people can have fetishes, right? It's not that big of a deal. No one who meets me can clock that I have an insatiable urge to perform cunnilingus because most people with kinks don't look like they have kinks.
It's perfectly understandable that women cannot fully relate to this. But if a woman wants to understand male sexuality, the first thing she has to understand is the power of the visual. That's why you see ads on billboards, on TV, and in magazines for every sort of product a man might buy, accompanied by a scantily clad woman, or sometimes just part of her. I recall a famous liquor ad that showed a woman's legs and a bottle of tequila. No face, just beautiful legs.
This does also work the other way around though. Like, our society views women as sex objects and expects men to be more overt about their sexuality whilst deriding women who do the same, so obviously this is going to be the case. It's not proof of anything, and I think if it was, Prager would actually have cited some studies or sources here, but he doesn't. Also, can we acknowledge that gay women exist? Prager doesn't because it hurts his point, but I know a few, and I can tell you right now that lesbians find other women's bodies just as attractive as men would, but I guess Prager would say that they're like honorary men, or something equally ignorant and offensive.
To deny the power of the visual on men is like denying that the earth is round.
Right, so basically Prager's been caught checking other women out and he wants to demonstrate that it's not actually his fault, and expecting him not to stare at teenagers in the gym
is like denying that the earth is round.
My anaconda don't, my anaconda don't, my anaconda don't want none unless you got buns, hun.
The London newspaper, the Daily Mail.
Oh, okay, straight in with the bullshit then. First off, the Daily Mail is a despicable right-wing rag that has a well-deserved reputation for being racist as fuck, starting with supporting Hitler and demanding that Britain not accept Jewish refugees fleeing the Third Reich, all the way up to the modern day where they branded the judges who ruled against the government on the legality of the Brexit referendum enemies of the people, simply because they wanted Brexit to happen regardless of legal implications. Secondly, the Daily Mail is not a London newspaper, it's a national one. In the UK we have national newspapers reporting on national and international news, and there's smaller local papers that report on local news. My local paper, for example, has a tendency to post regular updates on local dogging hotspots, which is hilarious. Bradgate Park is apparently the best place to go right now, incidentally. Literally 2 seconds in, and we found this many issues. Moving on.
Listed the top 10 problems experienced by couples on vacation together. And topping the list was the man looking at other women in bikinis on the beach.
So, this survey appears to be a relatively unscientific one carried out by holiday website Late Deals, in which 2,000 holidaymakers were asked to give the reasons for fights they were having whilst away, and top of the list was a perceived wandering eye on behalf of the male half of the couple. I unfortunately couldn't find the detailed findings of the survey online, and none of the articles I found actually linked to it, because I'd really like to know how it breaks down, how many gay couples are included, for example, and couples with different values, etc. These things are important and much more interesting to me than most women get jealous over their partner's wandering eye, because what's that? That's nothing. Dull, uninteresting. So the power of the visual stuff is reiterated here, once again asserting that only men are attracted to women physically, and if you believe otherwise then you must have been infected by liberal college education rather than just, reckoning that you know what women are like.
Now, in another Prager University course, I explained the sexual power of the visual on men. And as I show, and as anyone readily understands unless they've been misled by a politically correct college course, the power of the visual to excite men has no analog in women. Women don't get excited by virtually every male body at the beach. Male legs don't turn them on like female legs turn men on, etc., etc. It takes massive willpower, in fact, for a heterosexual man not to look at bikini-clad women. And few men, even the nicest, finest, and most monogamously faithful and loving, have such willpower.
Once again, we get the impression that Dennis Prager is in the doghouse and made a video to appease his wife and convince her that he's actually in the right because of some pseudo-scientific nonsense he made up.
So the Daily Mail notes, this frequently causes problems when a couple's itinerary includes a visit to the beach.
Okay, I hate to say this because I had to actually read a Daily Mail article in order to check, but no, it doesn't say that. What it does say is, it seems it is a combination of bikini beauties and a man's roving eye that causes most poolside quarrels, according to new research. Men ogling other women in their bikinis leads to most summer tiffs, followed by men wanting to do something active, while women prefer to lounge in a deck chair beside the pool or beach.
And what exactly is the problem? The problem is that the wife or girlfriend feels threatened by his looking. And why does she feel threatened? Because she thinks he is comparing her to those women.
At no point does any article I could find, including the blog post talking about it on Late Deals, ever mention the cause behind these arguments. Sure, one can simply infer the cause, but Dennis here just goes straight in with a baseless assumption as to the reason behind these arguments.
And why does this disturb her? Here are 3 reasons. First, virtually every woman, no matter how attractive, thinks that when her man is looking at other women in general, and in bikinis especially, he is finding them more attractive than her. Second, she thinks that he is therefore dissatisfied with her, which in turn arouses the unspoken but primal fear that he might leave her. And third, she is sure that her man will continue to think about these women long after they've disappeared from sight.
Again, not based on anything, and there are obviously women out there who either don't mind or actively support their partners looking at other women.
So now let's analyze these reasons. First, does the husband or boyfriend find these women on the beach, or for that matter anywhere else, more attractive than he finds his wife or girlfriend? Well, since I believe that only honesty works in the long run, the answer is sometimes yes. He may very well find some of those women more physically attractive than his woman. But here's the point that most women, again, understandably don't know. With very few exceptions, it doesn't matter. You heard me right. Of course, when looking at these other women, he may find some of them more physically attractive than the woman he's with. But, and here's the good news, so what? Presuming he is attracted to you, and if he isn't, it doesn't matter if you're vacationing in a monastery and all he sees are monks. He wants you. I repeat, he wants you. And if he does, all those other women don't amount to a hill of beans.
See, this is weird because I kinda agree that when someone checks another person out, they're not like, oh, she's so much hotter than my girlfriend, because that would be fucking stupid. It is natural to find other people attractive, but this idea that it's exclusively a man thing is fucking ridiculous.
There's another thing women need to know. Within seconds of her disappearing from view, he has no memory of any of these women. When in sight, they can take over his male mind. But out of sight, they are out of mind. It's as if they never existed. Yes, the visual gets men's total attention in a matter of seconds. But as soon as the woman he was focused on vanishes, most men forget what they saw in an equal number of seconds. Why does this come as news, and hard to believe news at that, to most women? Because you, the woman, remember the women your man looked at, and you therefore think that he too remembers them. But let me assure you, he doesn't. Most men under torture couldn't identify the women they looked at the hour before, let alone the day before, if they were shown photos of them along with photos of women they had never seen.
Right, so as much as I agree that being attracted to someone doesn't mean anything, this is going a bit far. Women on the beach are not like the Silence from Doctor Who. Also, don't gaslight women for getting upset, even if, in my opinion, that upset is probably unfounded, you patronising fuck.
And more good news. His seeing women who he thinks for that moment are more attractive than you has no bearing whatsoever on his being quote-unquote dissatisfied with you. Men find other women attractive in large measure just because they are other women. Men are programmed by nature to want variety, indeed endless variety. That's why God-fearing King Solomon had 700 wives and another 300 concubines, and secular Hugh Hefner had at least that many lovers.
Yeah, great job assuaging concerns there, mate. Men are programmed to want endless variety and as such often lust after other women, but stop worrying about it. Also, this isn't really true. Most people have a type rather than specifically searching out a variety of partners.
In sum then, when your man looks at these other, perhaps even more attractive women, he is A, not comparing you to them, B, not in any way becoming dissatisfied with you, and C, certainly not thinking of them later. He looks at them because they are other women, whether they are more attractive, just as attractive, or less attractive. They are women in bikinis, so he looks. Where there is basic domestic harmony and mutual physical attraction, more than anything your husband wants you. When he looks, he isn't comparing, he isn't getting dissatisfied, and he won't have a clue later as to who he saw. So when you're back in your hotel room, put on your own bikini and tell him you want him. Because again, more than anyone else in the world, he wants you. And if you don't believe me, ask him. You'll be glad you did, and so will he. I'm Dennis Prager.
Dennis Prager is A, trying desperately to make up with his wife, B, not looking at anyone but his wife, and C, uncomfortable sleeping on the sofa. I just want to make the point here that Prager acts as if there's such a thing as an objectively more or less attractive woman, when as we all know, attraction is entirely subjective. Please let me back in bed. I miss you. The sofa's uncomfortable and the dog keeps waking me up.
Cold pizza, tie-dye shirts, broken hearts. Give them here, give them here. Hand-me-downs, leftovers, sloppy seconds. Give them here, give them here.
Next up is the 7th video in Dennis Prager's 10 Commandments series, where he goes through them and tries to make them relevant to a modern day setting with mixed results, talking about adultery.
There's an old joke about the 7th commandment, do not commit adultery. Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and announces, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that I got him down to 10. The bad news is that adultery stays. The joke is telling.
Jesus, this is what Paul Joseph Watson meant when he said the right was getting better at comedy, because this seriously does make me nervous.
The prohibition on a married person having sexual relations with anyone except his or her spouse may be, for many people, the most consistently difficult of the 10 Commandments to observe.
Really? Really? So you think it's more difficult not to fuck someone else whilst in a relationship than accidentally saying, oh my god, in passing, remembering to respect your mother and father even after you explained how the printer works 1,000 goddamn times and they still call you up asking you to come over and show them how to photocopy something, or being envious of other people? Because I don't know about you, but I covet my neighbour's ass on a regular basis.
The reasons shouldn't be hard to guess. One is the enormous power of the sex drive. It can be very hard to keep in check for the entirety of one's marriage, especially when an attractive outsider makes him or herself sexually or romantically available.
Okay, yeah, sure, but as someone who managed to maintain a relationship for 4 years without committing adultery twice, I can tell you right now that it's really not that difficult. It probably helps that I'm fuck ugly and didn't get many people coming on to me until I was single and can actually afford to pursue them. Right, let's see where it goes with this.
Another reason is the human desire to love and be loved. For normal people, there is no more powerful emotion than love. If one falls in love with someone while married, it takes great effort not to commit adultery with that person. And if we add in the unfortunate circumstance of a loveless marriage, adultery becomes even more difficult to resist.
If the marriage is loveless, then why not just end it? There's a lot a relationship can bounce back from, but a lack of love is usually not one of them. Why would you be in a relationship with someone who doesn't love you?
That's why the joke with which I began is funny, because it reflects truth.
First off, no, it's still not funny, but also, no, it doesn't. I promise you, not cheating on your partner is not that difficult. Trust me on this.
Why is adultery prohibited in the 10 Commandments? Because, like the other 9, it is indispensable to forming and maintaining higher civilization. Adultery threatens the very building block of the civilization that the 10 Commandments seeks to create. That building block is the family, a married father and mother and their children.
Oh, here's the good shit. Proper conspiracy-minded bollocks. Like Black Pigeon Speaks level of complete fucking delusion about marriage making societies better by forcing women to submit. Why does the family have to be set up this way? Do gay couples not have families? What if a couple doesn't have kids? What if the parents aren't married? You trying to say that legally being bound to someone is in some way more of a family? Honestly, nowadays, who can even fucking afford to get married? Or kids? Give me a partner and a couple of sausage dogs and I'd call that a perfect family, not gonna lie.
Anything that threatens the family unit is prohibited in the Bible. Adultery is one example. Not honoring one's father and mother is another.
Okay, but what if your father or mother really hates your wife and wants to break you up as a couple? Should you just respect them and do nothing about it?
And the prohibition on injecting any sexuality into the family unit, incest, is a third example.
Weird that it's not a commandment then, really. I mean, if it's so important, you'd have thought that it would be on there. Don't shag your sister, I promise it's not like in porn, for example.
It's the most fantastic porn I've ever seen.
Isn't it the usual dead-eyed men fucking dead-eyed women in a desperate world of pain?
Why is the family so important? Because without it, social stability is impossible. Because without it, the passing on of society's values from generation to generation is impossible.
Oh God, I have to see him try to justify this.
Because commitment to a wife and children makes men more responsible and mature. Because more than anything else, family meets most women's deepest emotional and material needs. And nothing comes close to the family in giving children a secure and stable childhood.
Sources, please? Also, this is presumably only in a healthy marriage. If you're going to commit adultery, that's usually because you're in a bad place in your marriage, and I don't see someone who has all their emotional and material needs met wanting to commit adultery, so this is clearly bollocks.
And why does adultery threaten the family? The most obvious reason is that sex with someone other than one spouse can all too easily lead to either or both spouses leaving the marriage. Adultery should not automatically lead to divorce, but it often does. There is another reason adultery can destroy a family. It can lead to pregnancy and then to the birth of a child. That child will, in almost all cases, start out life with no family, meaning no father and mother married to each other to call his or her own. And if adultery doesn't destroy a family, it almost always does terrible harm to a marriage.
Why does Dennis Prager hate stepfamilies and divorced parents? If one family falls apart, why not try to build another one? Why does that mean it'll have no family? I can think of plenty of solutions to this. You could just say that the father leaves his wife to be with the mistress and raise the kid, or if it's a cheating wife, she tells her partner it's his. They're not moral, but they're an exception. Why does an unmarried couple, cohabitating and living an identical life to a couple who've had a wedding, have less value to Prager? What is his fucking deal? I mean, to be fair, he must love marriage because he's had 3 of them, but that doesn't mean that a couple who never marries is in any way worse parents or anything, right?
Aside from the sense of betrayal and loss of trust that it causes, it means that the adulterous partner lives a fraudulent life. When a husband or wife is having sex with someone other than their spouse, their thoughts are constantly about that other person and about how to deceive their spouse.
No, they're not. Like, I get the whole thing about living a double life or whatever, but just because you're having an affair doesn't mean that you're constantly thinking about it. Just like, if you strike up any new relationship, are you constantly thinking about that person, or do you occasionally have other thoughts, like, I need a shit?
Finally, the commandment prohibiting adultery doesn't come with an asterisk, saying that adultery is okay if both spouses agree to it.
Oh, fucking Christ, he's having a go at open relationships now. Okay then, putting aside the fact that throughout most of the Bible it is permitted, or at least expected, for a man to take multiple wives, does that not mean that all the biblical figures are adulterers? After all, the Bible requires a family to be one man and one woman who are married and their kids, remember?
Spouses who have extramarital sex with the permission of their husband or wife may not necessarily be hurting their spouse's feelings, but they are still harming the institution of marriage.
In what way? Genuinely, I need to know this. Like, if you're married and opening up the marriage is what saves the marriage from ending, then surely that's preferable to the alternative and actually helps to preserve the institution of marriage by, saving a number of marriages?
And protecting the family, not protecting spouses from emotional pain, is the reason for the commandment.
How is the family affected if one half of the couple fucks someone else with their partner's permission? They're not doing it in front of the kids or anything.
Many marriages, sadly, are troubled. And it is not for any of us to stand in judgment of others' behavior in this realm. No one knows what goes on in anyone else's marriage, and if we did, we might often well understand why one or the other sought love outside the marriage.
So it's not for us to judge, but if you have an open marriage, you are harming the institution of marriage. No judgment, though.
But no higher civilization can be made or can endure that condones adultery. That is why it is prohibited in the 10 Commandments.
I mean, that's not true though. In our society, adultery happens all the time with no repercussions, and you know what? We're doing just fine. Actually, we're not, but Dennis Prager probably actually disagrees. I mean, unless Dennis Prager has some kind of an issue with Western society, of course.
My universe will never be the same. I'm glad you came.
PragerU is bad. I don't think I really needed to say it again, but I feel that it needs to be said. And specifically, it needs to be said that PragerU not only hates women and minorities, Dennis Prager literally has an article on his website about why minorities should feel shame for existing, but also kind of hates the entire concept of sex as a whole, or at the very least understands very little about it. Men and women are more similar than conservatives like to think. Gender, as we all know, is a social construct, just like race or the stock market. Women don't have a lower sex drive than men necessarily. Men don't have a built-in insatiable, uncontrollable urge to gawp at women on the street like a fucking predator, and as we saw in the last video there, religion can give you a very strange view of sex and sexuality. Crucially, I think we've now confirmed my hypothesis that right-wingers, and especially conservatives, have too warped and messed up a view of sex to be any good in bed, and that we leftists, we sex-positive feminists, are the only ones who care about giving our lovers a good time. In the second part of this video, we'll be looking at how Dennis Prager himself sees sex as it pertains to marriage. See you then.
You look sexy when you do that. You look sexy when you do that. Yeah, you look sexy when you do that. You look sexy when you do that.
He probably fucks the dolls. Can I say that?
Oh, I thought you would have like some respect for this place, but
nope. Went in straight with he fucks the dolls.
Yeah, I'm with Pepe on this.
This is getting way off track.
Sorry, okay.